Epyx had been on a bit of a roll with their games series. Summer Games 1 and 2 were two of the best games you could ever play on an 8-bit machine. Winter Games continued that success, but then Epyx released World Games, which was a game based on events from around the globe. And in all honesty, I thought that game was rubbish. And I was left wondering if Epyx would ever produce a game that would rival their first three efforts. Well, in 1987 they did. California Games was a game that featured sports, hobbies or pastimes that were popular over in California, such as skateboarding, surfing and BMXing. Sports that were not massively popular here in the UK at that time, well, apart from the BMX, which every 80s kid in the UK knew all about. When you first play California Games, it does appear odd, as these are not conventional sports at all. But as the years would pass, events such as a halfpipe would become a staple of the X Games series, made popular by the likes of Tony Hawk. As with previous Epyx Games collections, each event has a unique set of controls. The halfpipe involves careful timing of the left and right to build up momentum, and then precise execution of either the fire button or direction tap will result in either a hand plant or a turn. Points are awarded based on height and difficulty of the trick. Other events, such as a footbag and surfing, have far less complicated controls, but are by no means easy to pull off correctly. Those events are more about timing and position than precision. There are only 6 events in this game, as opposed to the usual 8 found in most Epyx games, but each are enjoyable, and with a few friends round you can almost be guaranteed of much hilarity and mishaps when competing. I get California Games for Christmas 1987, and like almost all the other previous Epyx games, I get addicted to it from the very start. I really loved the non-conventional approach to the events. These sports seemed more youthful and current, especially the skateboarding, which coincided with my love of that pastime as well. Visually, the game is miles ahead of the previous Epyx games, with loads of bright colours everywhere and not an indoor event in sight. The animation had shifted along as well. Gone were the animations from Impossible Mission, and now each event was uniquely animated with lots of detail and attention, especially on events such as roller skating and BMXing. They all had this unique look to them, and they all looked great. But then, I would expect that, as the loading times between each event was mind-numbingly long. Another reason why I kept on at my parents' to get me a floppy drive. Sonically, the game is fine, with some upbeat tunes for the events and an odd choice of sound effects for others. But again, the Commodore 64 was famous for the SID chip producing some great tunes, just not great sounding tunes. The playability was excellent. I did struggle to get my new mates to see the enjoyment of playing computer games. They all preferred to do outside activities, but occasionally, on a rainy or cold day, they would come over to mine and we would give California Games a go, and for the most part, it provided a good laugh. But it definitely wasn't the same as with my old schoolmates. And I did spend a lot of time in those days reminiscing about that last day of school from the previous year, when we played Summer Games 1 and 2 and then Winter Games. Still the best school day of my life up to this point. The success of California Games was practically guaranteed, with Epyx selling over 300,000 copies in the game's first year of release. And with the now growing success of 16-bit micros, ports onto other platforms was a certainty too. I was very pleased to see it being released onto the Sega Master System in 1989, and this one looked even more impressive visually. This version of California Games is my favourite version. Everything about it was miles ahead of the Commodore 64 version, and best of all, there were no loading times, thank goodness. All of the 6 events are included, and each one has been given a visual overhaul from the Commodore 64 version, and with better controls too, it was more enjoyable to play. The animations on all of the events were superb in this game, and the backgrounds all look brighter and more arcade-like. The half-pipe seems super smooth, or at least it was super smooth for the time. It's a bit less so today, I reckon, but back then it looked great, and it was still as much fun to play. It was made easier with the control pad, which I have always found more precise than a joystick. When playing the half-pipe event, I thought the animations on the handplants looked absolutely amazing, and the animated scores just gave off this whole too cool for school vibe. And occasionally, when you wiped out, you would get this screen shaking to represent an earthquake, which I just loved. The footbag was probably the most basic of all the events in terms of visuals, with some basic animations on the character as he moves his feet and jumps. But the backgrounds are nice, with the Golden Gate Bridge in the background and a yacht sailing over to Alcatraz Island in the bay. The controls were, however, a little tricky in this event, but once you got the hang of it, it was a pretty fun event to play. But one of my favourite events was the surfing. I can remember spending ages trying to get to grips with the controls, and then trying to figure out how to land back on the wave. But again, persistence is key, and once you master the angles of takeoff and landing, then it was a great laugh to play. Visually, there was not much on offer. You have a wave and the sky, but the animations on the surfer are pretty good and keep in line with the rest of the game. The roller skating was probably the least improved event over the Commodore 64 version. The skating animation looked very similar, and the backgrounds made use of the better colour palette of the Master System, but I just felt that more could have been done. But it did have better controls, so it did make for a more enjoyable experience overall. The same goes for the BMX event as well. Better use of colour, but not a massive improvement over the Commodore 64, and it plays this weird kind of Batman-inspired tune as well. And speaking of the music and the sound, all of these are remarkably better than the Commodore 64 version, and the half-pipe tune is great. It's really catchy and funky and adds something to the event. So you could say I was well pleased with this on the Sega Master System, and my schoolmates had a bit of a rethink about video games, and in the summer of 1989 we played this game loads and loads, along with Wonder Boy 3 and Golden Axe. And that summer turned out to be one of the best summers I had in my youth. Even though these were not the same mates as my old schoolmates, all of the banter, the taunting and the like was just the same. And it turns out this lot were even more competitive than my old schoolmates, and so many an afternoon was spent competing against one another. California Games on the Sega Master System is truly one of the all-time great Master System games. But in 1991, I thought it was going to get even better when it got released on the Sega Megadrive. California Games had been this excellent game on just about every format you played it. That is, until the Mega Drive version came along. And this version is just plain awful, in my opinion. I don't know if maybe it hadn't aged well compared to other games out at the time, but something just seemed a bit dull about this version. The fun is nowhere to be found. Playing California Games on a Mega Drive is like taking a trip to the dentist. It's something you do, but you don't enjoy doing it. The visuals are improved, apparently. There is no question there has been an increase in detail, but I for one prefer the look of the previous games. This one just doesn't look right to me at all. The half-pipe had this almost cartoon-like sprite you controlled in previous versions, but in this version, it's more natural looking. The same for the footbag, but the surfing looks better, I think. The surfer now has some more animation to him, but again, the backgrounds are either big wave or sky and look pretty boring. The roller skating looks bang average, and even worse than the visuals is the music. This event seems to have pinched the half-pipe tune and butchered it to bits. It sounds terrible, and the BMX event has this awful parallax scrolling effect and a small, poorly animated cyclist. And the footbag tune from the Master System has been used here, and it adds nothing to this event. And then they removed the Frisbee event as well, so you only have 5 events to play. And when it came to playing this with mates, they all agreed this game was awful, and that the Sega Master System should get brought back out instead. It seems a shame, but it looks like this kind of game was not going to cut it anymore, and that maybe they should have been consigned to the 8-bit generation. I never played California Games on the Amiga or Atari ST, so I cannot comment on how they actually play, but judging from what I have seen online, they look pretty slow and lethargic, and I am glad I skipped past them. California Games was a good game, especially on the Master System, and that version remains my favourite version of the game. And when playing it back for this video, I still massively enjoyed it. And it's one of those games that will always remain good to play on that system. There are various ports of California Games on just about every format imaginable, but I recommend the Master System version. It's got better controls, it's got top quality visuals for most of the events, and a pretty decent soundtrack as well, and it's just heaps of fun to play. And that was my look back at California Games. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please feel free to give me a sub and a thumbs up, or maybe even a comment or two below about your memories of California Games. And a big thank you to all of those who have subscribed and commented on my channel. I do appreciate all the feedback and the support from each and every one of you. And that's all from me, folks. Thanks for watching.